Lyft drivers are apparently making more money than before. But how correct or true is this really? So you can see right away on this article, Lyft drivers are earning more pay. And going down here, Lyft drivers averaged over $35 an hour. I'm curious right away, do you agree with that or not in the comments? I have to be honest, I kind of call BS. But who knows? Remember, your location is the number one factor that determines how much money you make as a driver. So it could be that among all averages, or all amounts, it averages to 35. But even so, that's a lot. So let's talk about the specifics as to why Lyft is claiming, based off all the analytics, they're paying drivers more. And the biggest thing is David Risher, the new CEO. I've done a bunch of videos about this, especially when it comes to the Uber and Lyft battle that's going on right now. He pledged to boost driver earnings. I think this is huge. I remember he talked about that when taking over Lyft as a CEO. He wanted to kind of go back to the basics, focusing on what do drivers want, what do passengers want. And so he says, it's a promise the company says it's already delivering on as it tries to rebound from mounting losses and gain an edge over the rival Uber, who I didn't even know this actually. It has 70% right now of the US market share. That's a lot, right? A Lyft spokesperson said that they made a few different improvements. For example, upfront pay, which was introduced in October of last year, as all of us know. We get to see exactly what we'll earn before accepting a ride. But another thing which is really interesting, average earnings per ride are now up 10% from earlier this year. That's huge. Per ride earnings on long rides are up 14%, according to Lyft. So again, I'm curious for all my drivers out there, especially because location to location is a bit different, how has Lyft been for you? Now, I want to be honest, as we continue through this article, most drivers that I talk to when it comes to Lyft have stated they're making less. However, this article claims differently. So I'm curious, tell me what you think. Because again, location is a big thing. So again, $35 an hour on average. But there is a couple things they're doing which is really interesting. So let's see. This is kind of unique, and I'm curious to see what a lot of people say about this. Drivers will now be able to see where the busiest areas in real time are by looking at current wait times on the driver map. I think this is really kind of cool too. Drivers will also now be able to track their earnings throughout the duration of the rides by swiping up in the app when stopped. Previously, as we know, drivers could not track their earnings, unless they say rack, probably track, could not track their earnings and bonus progress if they were giving back-to-back rides. So now you can see everything kind of in the moment. I think that's a great idea, to be honest, because hey, why not? Like I mentioned earlier, after assuming the role as CEO in April, David Risher has set his sights on restructuring the company in order to focus on better meeting the needs of riders and drivers, like I said. And this is kind of the main kind of takeaway of this. The best way to get passengers is to have a lot of drivers. Makes sense. And the best way to get a lot of drivers is to have a lot of passengers. And two main points he made to conclude this article is one, as I mentioned before in other videos, he actually laid off over 1,000 people right here. As part of his turnaround plan, he immediately initiated a mass layoff to cut costs. Over 1,000 people were laid off from Lyft. Not drivers, but employees of Lyft. The plan is to use the savings to drive down fares and boost driver pay. I think that's an unfortunate thing, of course, for the people who were laid off, but maybe kind of a tricky thing that you kind of inevitably have to do to compete with Uber. And in addition, Risher told Fox Business that it's vital to enhance the experience for both drivers and riders, not one over the other. Now, I have to be honest, I feel a bit mixed about this. On one hand, let's start with the initial hit. Lyft drivers are making more than before. Now, that could be true. Like I said, most drivers that I have talked to in the comments or in person say they're making less with Lyft. However, I have heard the opposite, right? As you can imagine, your location is the biggest factor that determines how much money you can make. So it could be that for a lot of people that I have talked to, they just happen to be in lower paying areas, or maybe they were driving during a lull that Lyft just wasn't paying as much. I've also heard Lyft has removed a lot of their bonuses around the country. That also has a big effect on how much money you make as a Lyft driver. So I'm curious, for the people who drive a lot for Lyft in your given area, do you think you're getting paid more or less when it comes to Lyft? Because I have to be honest, when David Risher started as a CEO, He did the mass layoffs. He's been doing a lot, like removing Lyft shared rides and a lot more. My mindset is when it comes to drivers, it's going to be one or the other. There's no in between. Either A, drivers are going to make way more money because he's like, hey, we got to pay drivers more. Or on the other end, drivers are going to make way less money because they're like, hey, we got to pinch pennies. We're not doing well financially, as I've said in a bunch of other videos. So it seems like based off this article with their numbers claiming that drivers are making more per ride, especially long rides and everything, it seems like it's the former. It seems like that for a lot of drivers, based off the math, they're making more now with Lyft as a result of all these things David Reacher is doing. I think especially laying off over 1,000 people, that definitely affects a lot. So with that being said, I think that if this is true, which I feel like why would they lie about the mathematics in the article, that's a good thing. Lyft drivers are now making more than before. The second thing though is the average of $35 an hour. I don't know, that raises some questionable things for me. I mean, I look at a tremendous amount of analytics and statistics, especially with me being a former accountant. I've read, I don't even know how many articles, maybe over 100 about how much the drivers make per hour. What about the location? What about this? Like, I've read so much, as you can imagine. I've done so many in-depth videos about the analytics and the financials of being a rideshare driver. 35 to me seems ridiculously high, but I do have a couple of things too. Is one, does this include bonuses? It seemed like they've removed a lot of the bonuses, like I said before. Maybe it does. Second thing, I feel like there's no way this includes taxes, depreciation, blah, blah, blah. It's probably like your fare that you're making or whatever. But I think another big thing, the third thing, which I feel like is not really mentioned in this article, but I feel like I'm going to assume it, is this probably includes things like Lyft Lux, Lyft Lux Black, because mathematically, for $35 an hour to be the average, you have to have an insane amount above that. Because I know most drivers, and I've said this before, I'd say make typically about $20 to $25 an hour. So when you look at, 35 being the average, I feel like it has to include these luxury options, even things like Lyft XL and whatnot, I feel like have to be included in that $35 an hour average. I think that's ridiculously high. Again, I know it sounds kind of weird to say in a video like this. Why would they lie about it? I mean, who knows? But I feel like $35 an hour on average, kind of ridiculous. But I think this is a huge step in the right direction. I gotta be honest, I do like what David Reacher is doing. He is making some difficult moves, like I said, laying that amount of people off and everything. It is a difficult, but potentially a necessary move in order to get Lyft back on track. And I do like his mindset. He's like, look, we want to go back to the basics. What the drivers want, what the passengers want. And I think especially too, he seems like he's kind of, and I want to word this in the right way, has a good amount of, I know it sounds weird for a business person, but I think a good amount of common sense as to, okay, what do people generally want? And as he stated, the more drivers on the road, the more passengers take lefts and vice versa, right? It's a two-way street. And like I said, he's not going to favor the drivers. He's not going to favor the passengers, not one over the other. I think that's a great mindset because I know like here in LA and a lot of other places, it is way quicker to get a Uber than it is to get a Lyft. And as I said too, I didn't even know this too before reading this article, that about 70% of the ride-sharing market in the United States is Uber. I guess it makes sense, but I didn't know it was that high. I mean, that's a good amount. That means Lyft has only about 30-ish%. I guess if you factor in other apps, maybe a little bit less than that. But, let's say 30-ish%, give or take, of the rideshare market here in the United States. Very, very low. I know it's that low, but I think he has the right mindset. But the biggest thing is if there's more drivers on the road, it's easier to get a Lyft. Because I know for me, let's say pull up Lyft and Uber and I'm going somewhere. There's been a lot of times where I'm like, hey, Lyft is cheaper. Let's take a Lyft. And I hit that button and it just does that weird kind of thing at the bottom of the bar where it almost looks like it's loading or finding a driver. And then 10 or 15 minutes goes by and it says, sorry, no drivers available. And I'm like, oh man. And I'm like, okay. If I order an Uber, it says, oh, your Uber will be there in 3 or 4 minutes. That's what it's like in LA. I know every city is a little bit different. I know some cities, for example, I've been told are more Lyft heavy. They focus more on Lyft than Uber. But I gotta be honest, it almost seems like if I really look at the meta-analysis, that Uber is pretty much the dominant one everywhere. And even if Lyft is cheaper, if there's not enough drivers on the road, who cares, right? So with all this kind of coming into play, with all these kind of new numbers coming out, it does seem like Lyft is slowly getting better. Again, more drivers on the road equals more passengers, equals cheaper rides, higher pay for drivers, especially with everything Lyft's doing. So things so far are looking good. And I think it's good that a lot of Lyft drivers are, according to the article, making more money now than before. That's huge. But the $35 an hour on average, I think a little bit high, but even still, I think this is a huge step in the right direction.